Hey guys, tonight we're going on a sleepy, meandering journey through the scented past, a gentle ramble through ancient gardens and bustling marketplaces. Imagine you're standing in a vibrant Roman market, the air thick with the aroma of unfamiliar spices, the rhythmic clinking of clay pots, and the murmur of distant chatter. You're holding a small pouch, its contents and herbs so precious, it's worth more than silver. The scent is calming, almost hypnotic. You probably wouldn't last a day trying to haggle for it, but tonight you don't have to. We're just here to relax. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop a comment below with your location and local time, so we know where in the world you're settling in for the night. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin our gentle drift into history by thinking about something you probably have in your kitchen right now. Pepper. You know, the kind you grind over your food. We take it for granted, but for a long time, this wasn't just a seasoning. It was a currency. Imagine walking into a Roman market, your pockets jangling with coins, but what you really need is pepper. Roman merchants would trade for it, not with silver or gold, but with more pepper. The stuff was so valuable that it was a common practice for Roman legions to pay their soldiers in bags of pepper. A soldier's pay wasn't just a handful of denarii. It could be a pouch of these tiny black peppercorns, each one a little piece of wealth. It's a bit like paying a mortgage in almonds today, which sounds a bit nutty, but it was just a part of life back then. This high demand and value for pepper, or piper as the Romans called it, led to the development of complex trade routes, and even helped shape empires. The Romans' love affair with it was a huge driver of their trade with India, and it kept those sea lanes busy. So next time you're seasoning your dinner, just think about the epic, sleepy journey those tiny peppercorns took. Now, let's move away from the Roman world for a moment and talk about another familiar spice, cinnamon. This one has an even stranger history. The ancient Egyptians didn't just use cinnamon for cooking. They used it in their embalming process. They believed its fragrant and preservative properties helped prepare the deceased for the journey to the afterlife. Now, imagine you're an Egyptian embalmer, the air thick with the smell of myrrh, frankincense, and sweet cinnamon. You're carefully applying these costly spices, not just as a ritual, but also as a practical step to keep the body preserved. The cinnamon would have been a crucial ingredient, an aromatic shield against decay, a final fragrant farewell. This practice demonstrates just how deeply ingrained these herbs and spices were in ancient life, touching every part of it, from food to religion to death. And it makes you wonder what strange things we use today that will be viewed with a similar kind of sleepy fascination in a few thousand years. Maybe the tiny packets of silica gel we find in new shoes? Who knows? The journey of these spices, like cinnamon, was fraught with adventure and a good dose of mystery. For centuries, the people who sold cinnamon kept its true origin a secret. They wove fantastical tales of giant birds building their nests out of cinnamon sticks on mountaintops, or of the sticks floating down from faraway lands on great rivers. This made the spice seem even more exotic and valuable, and allowed them to charge a massive markup. You'd be in a marketplace, listening to a merchant with a twinkle in their eye, telling you about the treacherous journey to get this miraculous bark from the lands of myth. Of course, the reality was much more mundane. It came from trees in places like modern-day Sri Lanka. Historians still argue whether these stories were just clever marketing, or if the sellers genuinely believed some of the myths themselves, having only received the product from other traders in a long, silent chain. It's hard to say, but it definitely made the stories a little more spicy. Now, let's turn our sleepy attention to the Roman world again. A place where a doctor's bag was less like a modern medicine kit and more like a gardener's basket filled with peculiar plants. You're lying in a Roman villa, a mild fever setting in, and a doctor arrives, not with a thermometer, but with a small pouch. This pouch contains not little pills, but a collection of dried herbs. The one that catches your eye is a bundle of chamomile. The Romans knew its calming properties, and it was often brewed into a gentle tea to soothe a restless patient and help them drift off to sleep. This isn't just a mainstream historical fact. It's something we still do today. It's comforting to think that something as simple as a cup of chamomile tea connects us directly to a sleepy Roman citizen with a headache. But not all of their remedies were so gentle or familiar. Some of their herbal cures were downright peculiar, even by their own standards. Take, for instance, mandrake root. The mandrake plant was famous, or perhaps infamous, for its forked root, which often resembled a small, grotesque human figure. The Romans, like many ancient cultures, believed this gave it magical and even dangerous properties. A fringe tidbit here: they believed the plant would scream when pulled from the ground, and that hearing this scream was a fatal omen. So to harvest it, they would often tie a dog to the plant and then retreat to a safe distance, letting the dog pull the root out and take the fatal scream for them. It sounds ridiculous, but it was a serious belief. The mandrake itself was used as an anesthetic, a sort of ancient sedative. It was powerful, but also poisonous, making its use a bit of a risky gamble. Historians still argue whether the medicinal benefits outweighed the very real danger, or if its use was more rooted in superstition than genuine pharmacology. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, lost to the annals of history, like a whisper on a cool Mediterranean breeze. And speaking of peculiar remedies, let's talk about the Romain solution for a hangover. You've had a little too much fermented grape juice at a dinner party, and you wake up with a pounding headache. What's the cure? Well, their doctors would have given you a blend of boiled cabbage and a touch of parsley. They believed these herbs were excellent at absorbing the toxins from the wine and soothing the stomach. It's a far cry from a modern-day painkiller, but it was their go-to solution. A fun little detail: they also believed that wearing a wreath of parsley on your head could help prevent a hangover in the first place. So you might have seen a few Roman revelers with crowns of green leaves, looking a bit like strange garden gnomes. It's a very visual, very silly little scene to imagine, and it really puts a smile on your face, doesn't it? The use of herbs went far beyond just medicine. They were also used in a symbolic sense. Rosemary, for example, was a symbol of remembrance. Students would often wear wreaths of rosemary on their heads during exams, believing it would improve their memory. It's a sweet, comforting thought, a gentle kind of ancient aromatherapy. It's also a practice that has a certain quaint charm to it, imagining a whole classroom full of Roman students, all smelling faintly of rosemary. It probably made the room a much more pleasant place to be, that's for sure. And with these gentle thoughts of chamomile and rosemary, we can just let ourselves drift a little deeper into the quiet stillness of the past. The Romans' world of herbs was a complex, fascinating blend of science, superstition, and a lot of very specific folklore, and we're just scratching the surface. Let's now float down the long, winding ribbons of the Silk Road, a vast network of ancient trade routes that stretched across continents. Imagine you are a merchant, 1,000 years ago, somewhere in the sun-drenched deserts of Central Asia. The air is dry and hot, and your camel caravan trudges forward, a rhythmic, sleepy shuffle. In your saddlebags, alongside bolts of silk and precious jewels, you carry something far more aromatic: herbs and spices. But these aren't just for trade. They're part of your very survival kit. You have a small pouch of dried ginger root, not for flavor, but to chew on for nausea and an unsettled stomach during long, bumpy days on the road. You'd also carry fenugreek, a strange-smelling plant whose seeds you could mash into a paste to soothe skin irritations and camel bites. The gentle humor of this situation, using something you might find in a curry today for a camel bite, makes you smile a little, doesn't it? The Silk Road wasn't just about moving luxury goods. It was a slow, deliberate exchange of knowledge, culture, and yes, herbal remedies. When your caravan would stop at an oasis, you'd meet other merchants from different lands. A merchant from China might introduce you to ginseng, a root they swore by for energy and vitality, a perfect antidote for the weariness of the journey. You, in turn, might share your knowledge of frankincense from the Arabian Peninsula, a resin burned for its fragrant smoke and used to soothe respiratory ailments. The exchange of these small packets of dried leaves and roots was a silent, peaceful form of diplomacy, creating a shared understanding of the world's botanical bounty. It was a beautiful, gentle mosaic of ancient wisdom being pieced together, one dusty merchant at a time. A crucial fringe tidbit for any weary traveler on the Silk Road was valerian root. This little herb was prized for its sedative properties. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep in a makeshift desert camp, with the wind howling and strange desert animals stirring in the dark. A small amount of valerian root, steeped in hot water, would have been the perfect, all-natural sleep aid. It's comforting to know that even thousands of years ago, people were looking for gentle ways to fall asleep, just like we are now. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of valerian root across Eurasia was a result of independent discoveries or a direct result of its specific popularity on the Silk Road. It's a quiet, scholarly debate that we can just let wash over us, like the slow, quiet sands of the Gobi Desert. The value of these herbs wasn't just in their medicinal properties. It was also in their symbolic weight. Carrying a pouch of fragrant myrrh was a sign of status and wealth. It wasn't just a powerful antiseptic. It was a subtle display of your connections and resources. Myrrh was as much a status symbol as it was a medicine, and it would have been carefully guarded. Its sweet, earthy scent would mingle with the dust and the leather of your bags, a constant reminder of the precious cargo you carried. These simple, dried plants were a physical representation of the vast, interconnected world you lived in, a network of people and ideas and scents that stretched further than you could ever imagine. And now, you can just imagine that scent, 1,000 years old, and let it carry you gently away into a deep, peaceful sleep. Leaving the dusty caravan trails of the Silk Road behind, let's take a peaceful, slow journey across the ocean to the lush, vibrant gardens of the ancient Aztecs. You are no longer a weary merchant. You are a quiet, thoughtful gardener in the magnificent floating gardens of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital. The air here is not dusty, but humid and thick with the scent of damp earth and exotic flowers. These gardens, or chinampas, are engineering marvels, and they weren't just for growing food. They were also sacred spaces for cultivating powerful and revered herbs. The Aztecs had an intimate, almost spiritual knowledge of their plants, and it's a knowledge we can now explore in a sleepy, unhurried way. One of the most important plants you would have tended was copal, a tree resin. This wasn't just another aromatic. It was a deeply spiritual substance. You would burn it on coals, and its sweet, piney smoke would fill the air. The Aztecs believed this smoke was a form of communication with the gods, a way to cleanse spaces and prepare for important rituals. It was a mainstream historical fact of their daily life, a constant, gentle presence in their homes and temples. The scent itself would have been a powerful, calming sensory cue, a sign of spiritual peace. Today, you might burn a little incense to relax, but for the Aztecs, this was a sacred act with deep meaning. Now for a peculiar fringe tidbit about Aztec gardens. They cultivated a plant called cacahuatl, the very plant that gives us chocolate. But they didn't just eat it. They used it as a medicine. The Aztecs believed it was a powerful heart tonic and would also use it as a kind of mild sedative to soothe patients. They would mix the cacao with other herbs and spices, like chili peppers and vanilla, to create a bitter, frothy drink. It was a far cry from the sweet hot cocoa we know today. Imagine being given this spicy, bitter drink to calm you down. It's a funny thought, isn't it? It shows how a single plant can have a completely different purpose in a different culture. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs' use of chocolate as a sedative was an effective physical remedy or more a psychological comfort, a powerful ritual that helped put people at ease. It's one of those quiet, academic debates that has no easy answer. The Aztecs' knowledge wasn't just limited to spiritual and medicinal herbs. They also used them for everyday ailments. They used peyote, a psychoactive cactus, not for recreation, but as a potent painkiller. They would carefully prepare it, and it was considered an important tool in their healer's arsenal. Of course, it was powerful and could have intense effects, so its use was very controlled and respected. These ancient healers, or medicinal, were master botanists. They had a deep understanding of which herbs could cure and which could harm. You can imagine a medicinal walking through the floating gardens, their feet sinking slightly into the soft, rich earth, their hands gently touching each plant. A deep, silent conversation happening between the healer and the natural world around them. It was a world where every plant had a purpose, a quiet rhythm of growth and use that sustained an entire civilization. And now, you can just let that quiet rhythm lull you to sleep. Drifting back from the ancient Aztec gardens, let's now settle gently into the cobblestone streets and bustling homes of medieval Europe. The air here is no longer humid and fragrant with tropical plants, but instead smells of wood smoke, baking bread, and a mix of herbs hung up to dry. In this world, herbs were just as important as in the Roman or Aztec empires, but their uses were often different and just as peculiar. You're now a medieval housewife, or perhaps a traveling peddler, and you're arranging dried bundles of herbs. These aren't just for cooking. They're your household's defense against all manner of unpleasant things. You hang bundles of lavender and rosemary from the rafters, not for their pleasant scent, but because people believed they repelled evil spirits and warded off the plague. A mainstream historical fact is that the fragrant smoke of burning herbs was often used to try and cleanse the air during outbreaks of illness, in a rather sleepy and gentle version of fumigation. They didn't have a lot of options, so they used what they had, and it's a sweet, simple thought. But the medieval use of herbs went far beyond just warding off bad smells. They were also used in a symbolic, sometimes humorous way. Let's talk about parsley again, but this time in a different context. In medieval Europe, parsley was often associated with death and rebirth. A fringe tidbit here. Gardeners would often say that parsley seed had to go to the devil and back 7 times before it would grow. It was a common joke, a light-hearted way of explaining why it took so long for the stubborn little seeds to sprout. You can almost hear a medieval gardener leaning on a shovel, telling this story with a wry smile. It's a bit of gentle, earthy humor from a time that often seems so serious. And speaking of peculiar beliefs, let's discuss mullein. This tall, fuzzy-leaved plant grew wild all over Europe. While it was used for a variety of medicinal purposes, its most peculiar use was in love potions. If you were a young person in love, you might have used mullein leaves in a concoction to make your beloved fall for you. Of course, this was a blend of folklore and earnest desire. Historians still argue whether the use of such plants in love potions was a genuine belief in their magical properties, or if it was simply a ritual that helped people feel they had some control over their romantic destiny. It's a quiet, scholarly debate that we can just let drift past us. The important thing is that these herbs were a part of the daily narrative, a blend of the practical and the magical. The medieval world was full of small, quiet herbal remedies for everyday life. If you had a headache, a compress of mint leaves might be applied to your temples. If you had trouble sleeping, a pillow stuffed with hops would be your go-to-sleep aid, much like we have today. These simple, natural remedies were a part of the rhythm of life, a quiet understanding of the natural world that surrounded them. They didn't have a pharmacy down the street. They had a garden in their backyard. And now you can just imagine that quiet garden, the rustle of the leaves, the soft scent of drying herbs, and let it all lull you gently to sleep. Now let's talk about a herb so unique and so sought after that it essentially vanished from the face of the earth. I'm talking about silphium. Imagine a plant so valuable that it became a symbol of the ancient city of Cyrene, a city located in modern-day Libya. It was a mainstream historical fact that the city's coins often had an image of the silphium plant stamped on them, a testament to its economic and cultural importance. The plant, which grew in a very specific region, was the source of a resin that the ancient Greeks and Romans absolutely adored. They used it for everything from a spice to a potent medicine. Its flavor was so unique and coveted, described as a sort of garlicky, mustardy, peppery leek-like mix, that people would pay exorbitant prices for it. The most peculiar, and perhaps most famous, use of silphium was as a form of ancient birth control. A fringe tidbit: the Greeks and Romans believed that a small dose of silphium resin could prevent pregnancy, and it was so effective that it was in incredibly high demand. This is why the plant was harvested to extinction. People wanted it so much for this specific purpose that they simply pulled it all up and never let it grow back. It's an odd kind of tragedy, isn't it? A plant that was so loved and so useful that its very popularity led to its demise. Today, historians still argue whether silphium was actually an effective contraceptive, or if its use was more based on hopeful belief and folk wisdom. We can't know for sure, as the last known stock of silphium was given to the Roman Emperor Nero as a curiosity. Nero, ever the oddball, supposedly ate it. The demand for silphium also led to a fascinating market of fakes and counterfeits. You'd have merchants trying to sell you a similar-looking plant or a cheaper resin, claiming it was the real thing. It was a bit like the Wild West of ancient herbs, with everyone trying to get their hands on the magical plant, or at least a convincing replica. The desire for silphium was so intense that it played a huge role in the economy of the region. The city of Cyrene became incredibly wealthy just from selling this one plant. It shows how one little herb could literally build a city, and then, through its own popularity, disappear completely. So, now we have to rely on ancient descriptions and images to imagine what this mysterious plant was like. We can only quietly wonder about its unique flavor and its incredible properties. It's a gentle botanical ghost story, a tale of a forgotten herb that was a part of daily life for centuries, and then simply wasn't. And as you let that story settle in your mind, you can just let the quiet stillness of that lost plant drift you deeper into a peaceful sleep. Our final gentle journey tonight takes us to a place that might seem a little spooky, but which was, for the ancients, a deeply spiritual and solemn place, the land of the afterlife. We'll talk about how herbs and spices, our constant companions in life, were also considered essential for the journey into death. You're now a quiet observer in a world where preparing for death was as important as preparing for a feast. The Egyptians, for example, used herbs and spices not just for embalming, as we touched on earlier, but also to represent a kind of symbolic journey. A mainstream historical fact is that frankincense and myrrh, those fragrant resins from the Silk Road we talked about earlier, were crucial in this process. Their sweet, earthy scents weren't just for preservation. They were believed to be a pathway for the soul, a fragrant trail to the divine. But not all of these rituals were so grand. A peculiar fringe tidbit from ancient Greek funerary rites is the use of marjoram. The Greeks believed that marjoram was a plant of mourning. They would often plant it on graves, believing its sweet scent would help comfort the deceased and the living. It was a gentle, natural way to remember a loved one, a small, fragrant monument to a life lived. This is such a simple, beautiful thought, isn't it? A quiet, living memorial. Historians still argue whether the use of marjoram in this context was a deliberate choice for its scent, or if it was simply a plant that grew well in the dry, rocky soil of the Mediterranean and was adopted for a more symbolic purpose. It's a quiet, scholarly debate, a gentle hum of academic thought, and we can just let it fade into the background. And let's not forget about the use of herbs in ancient Roman funeral pyres. The Romans would often burn large quantities of fragrant herbs, like rosemary and cypress, along with the body. The smoke was a way to mask the smell of the burning. Yes, but it was also a way to honor the deceased. The fragrant smoke was believed to carry their spirit up to the heavens, a final aromatic ascent. This was a common practice, a part of the rhythm of life and death, a quiet and respectful farewell. The air would be thick with the sweet, woody scent of rosemary, a final calming perfume for the soul's last journey. So you see, from the Roman doctor's bag to the Aztec floating gardens, from the Silk Road to the quiet burial grounds, herbs and spices were so much more than just a seasoning. They were healers, currencies, spiritual guides, and a fragrant bridge between this world and the next. They were a quiet, powerful force in the ancient world, a story told in scents and tastes. They were woven into the very fabric of life, and as you close your eyes and let your mind wander, you can almost smell them on a gentle breeze. You can imagine a world where a single leaf or a tiny seed could hold so much meaning. It's a peaceful, quiet thought, a fitting end to our journey tonight. Now, let yourself sink a little deeper into your pillow. All those scents and images of ancient worlds, they can all just soften now, like the fading light of a sunset. The bustling markets, the dusty caravan trails, the quiet gardens, they are all a part of history, and they are all now a part of your peaceful slumber. Let the last little wisps of these old stories drift away like the fragrant smoke from a Roman funeral pyre. The world is quiet now. Your mind is still. There's no more need to wander. Just let the darkness come, a soft and comforting blanket. And with it, let sleep find you. A deep, restorative sleep that is as old and as peaceful as the stories we have shared tonight. You can feel your body grow heavy, your breathing grow slow and steady, each breath a gentle rhythm. Just rest. Everything is all right. Sleep now.